Hello and welcome to this special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. My name is Joe Willis. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA, and I'm here today with Rick Jacobs from the Law Enforcement Training and Education Consultants, LTEM. Said that right?
Yes.
Awesome. And so today, Rick, I really want to talk to you about the class that you're presenting at ILEETA 2026. This series of conversations in these special learning labs are all about the conference and the great classes we're going to have there. Yours is one of 120, but I'm over 120, and I'm super excited to learn about this evaluation model, LTEM, and you're going to tell us all about it, and I'm just going to turn it over to you, and let's dig right in.
Absolutely. So a lot of people talk about evaluating training and it results, and what we end up doing is writing what we call a smile sheet, which is the end of course survey where you circle 1 through 5. Did the instructor do well? Did you find tasties and chewies? Did you like the bottle of water? Was parking good? That kind of stuff. It doesn't really tell us anything about the training. It becomes more of a popularity contest. And that's where we leave it. We evaluate the performance of an instructor based on these smile sheets. We evaluate the quality of the course based on the smile sheets. And it all comes down to participant perspective of whether or not they like the course and like the person. The participant perspective is important, but there's a lot more to training evaluation. We have to know if the training is effective, and we have to know if the training actually met its goals. And a lot of that can't be done the way we currently do that. Overwhelmingly, law enforcement training is evaluated for efficacy based on body count. If we killed somebody this year, then people need training. If somebody did something stupid, then we need to do training. If we don't hear anything, training must be doing well. And that's not how it is at all. Now, to remedy that, a lot of people have tried to apply Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation. Well, it was the best thing we had because it was really the only thing we had. In about 2018, 2019, while I was working for a corporation, I've always been very frustrated with Kirkpatrick's because it was always measuring stuff that even businesses couldn't measure. And you would think that they could measure the evaluation of training because they have all the money and everybody's contained in a single box. And they weren't doing that effectively. Now, I've been in learning and development for over 30 years now. I've been involved in law enforcement industry, either outside as a consultant, inside as a deputy and a general instructor, firearms instructor, other types of instructor, and then outside back to being a consultant. I've worked in law enforcement, graphic design, higher education. I've worked for Wells Fargo, and a number of web technologies, things like that. And they all come down to the same problem. They're not evaluating training effectively. So even when you go for job interviews, and they ask you, do you know how to evaluate training? It's like, yes, I know the 4 levels of the Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation. They never ask you how you would apply it, because even with Kirkpatrick's, we never rise higher than a level 2 evaluation. A level 2 evaluation is essentially end of course testing. A level 1 evaluation is participant performance. And that's the end of course survey. So I always struggle with that because I always felt like people are usually happy when they've learned something, but it doesn't mean that they actually learn anything. And so the end of course survey is capturing something at the very end of the course. And while I was investigating, are there alternatives? Like I said, in 2019, I discovered the learning transfer evaluation model, which was invented by Dr. Will Thalheimer. And he started this research and created LTEM based on a lot of research, a lot of application, a lot of testing. And when I saw what he had written, I was like, holy crap. Not only is this good for law enforcement, not only is this good for corporations, this is exactly what law enforcement training needs for evaluation. Because one of the biggest problems with Kirkpatrick's is it's measuring results. It's measuring the results of people and how they feel about something. It's measuring the results of them taking a test. And level 3 is results of the organization, and level 4 is results on the general population. Like I said, most corporations aren't measuring level 3 and level 4. Law enforcement just can't. There are things that we cannot control. corporations can use Kirkpatrick's, Kirkpatrick's was designed based off of the Industrial Revolution. It was based off of, are we making sales? Are we making widgets? Are people hitting their metrics? That kind of stuff. In a very controlled environment where they could impact the results more effectively. They weren't making decisions. They were just producing things. As you know, law enforcement only controls half the board. The people that we work with, the people out in society who we come in contact with, they have a choice in it. So where Kirkpatrick's is focused on results, learning transfer evaluation model is focused on performance. And right now, there's a massive trend in law enforcement training talking about we need to get to more performance. We need to get to more performance. And that's absolutely true. It's also being reflected in the learning and development industry for all the other industries outside of law enforcement. People are focusing on performance, but they don't know how to create or how to measure performance. So what the learning transfer evaluation model is a way of measuring the efficacy of training, doing an evaluation on training based on the performance of the participants and then the performance of the course, which is Kirkpatrick's doesn't get to. Now, I know a lot of people can argue with me about Kirkpatrick's and all that. I've applied Kirkpatrick's, and that's what I found. When I started applying learning transfer evaluation model, I started seeing that the things that we're really learning aren't captured by Kirkpatrick's. So, for instance, the tier one of learning transfer evaluation model is attendance completion. Everyone in law enforcement knows that sitting in a room watching a PowerPoint presentation doesn't mean you can go out and do anything. There's no assessment. There's nothing showing that there was any kind of transfer. So in tier one, it's not considered learning. There's no performance to measure. There's no performance to look at. There are 8 tiers in a learning transfer evaluation model, and they're all focused on what the participant, or what he calls the learner, which is a lot of science and a lot of academia and all that stuff. I like to call participants because I want them actively engaged in my training, whether it's e-learning or in-person training. So there's research done by Dr. I just totally spaced her name, sorry. There's research done in Las Vegas using LTEM to measure performance of nurses in a hospital. And what they found is that not only does LTEM do an excellent job in evaluating training and the performance of people and their courses, it also creates a design tool where if you want, just as we're supposed to look at what we want for our goals and work backwards, LTEM provides the path to look at what we want to evaluate and work backwards to how we design the course so that we meet those different metrics that we're going to eventually evaluate. So
how is this different from the ADDIE model in that way, or one of those other models where there is an evaluation very intentionally put into the design process? Is this kind of the same as that?
No, actually, LTEM is a tool to use in the evaluation process, but also in the design process. So LTEM is a tool. ADDIE is a framework for creating training from analysis all the way to evaluation. It is iterative. A lot of people think it's a linear process.
No, it's very iterative. Framework,
but it's iterative. In every phase of ADDIE, you're doing every phase of ADDIE also. So what LTEM is a way of measuring performance along the entire way. So LTEM is a tool that you use in design, and it's a tool that you use at evaluation. The way I implement it, excuse me. The way I implement it is that when I'm done with my analysis and I have my lists of tasks, I created a tool, one of my templates that I sell or give out depending on what the situation is. I have a tool where you list all your tasks according to how you want to measure the performance, and that establishes what performance objectives that you would use using Bloom's taxonomy and the psychomotor and the cognitive domains. At the end of it, because we want to measure what our goals are, if we don't create quality evaluation tools up front, we don't have quality evaluation on the back end. The same for performance objectives. if we don't write performance objectives that we can measure, we're not measuring performance at the end of the course. And so LTEM provides a guide, a tool for making sure your performance objectives can be evaluated and measured. And at the end of it, you already know how to evaluate and measure those that performance at the end of class, but also where it's most important, after the class. 30, 90, 180 days after the class, you can go back and use that same performance metric in LTEM to evaluate the performance of your participants as they're actually doing the job in the real world.
Awesome. And let's talk briefly about the way the class is going to run. Let's touch that first. Like, I come into the class, kind of talk me through what I should expect as an attendee at your class at the conference. What am I going to get?
So first off, every time I do a presentation, it comes with a participant guide. The way I write all my presentations, all my courses, you need to leave with a textbook, because just throwing a bunch of slides at you with notes where you can take note with note lines is not going to help you, especially because my slide decks are very minimalist. So they're going to get a workbook, and in the workbook, we're going to talk about the problems with Kirkpatrick's, and we'll go into more anecdotes. We'll talk about more application and some of the research that was done with Kirkpatrick's versus LTEM. But then we're going to talk about how to actually apply it. I'm going to provide the spreadsheet tool that I use so that people can look at it. We're briefly going to go over, ADDIE and how LTEM applies to the design and the evaluation phases. But then we're going to talk about how LTEM can help them design the course, as well as how they would go about measuring the performance after the course. So when they come in, expect to do work. I don't like talking all the time. So we're going to actually do work in that time, and come prepared with a course that you're considering, a course that you want to revise. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of Bloom's taxonomy and performance objective writing courses during the conference. This will give you an opportunity to see how all that ties together.
Yeah, I love it. And I think so. It sounds to me like this is going to be a very interactive from the beginning. And I love those classes where I get to show up with my problem from my piece of the world. I come from an agency with, 18 sworn officers. I have a different problem set than an agency with 30,000 on the East Coast, right? There is a very wide array of what could show up in that room. And I love it when I'm able to show up with my own and then interact. And it sounds like you're going to provide that. So that's really going to help. And, go ahead.
Oh, learning principles are the same regardless of industry. They don't change. It's the methods that change based on the industry. And there's a lot of things that law enforcement can do, but there's a lot of things that law enforcement can't do because we don't have a controlled environment. And we're working with people who are not input-output machines, so we can't measure the results of their interactions. All we can do is measure the performance. And I really believe that if we could get people to start looking at training, start evaluating performance of participants based on their performance instead of the results of their performance, we're going to see a bigger shift in training, but also see a bigger shift within society for how law enforcement do their policing. And it gives ammo to, we watched this person, they performed exactly the way they wanted to. This person made a choice and forced them to do other stuff. And I'll talk about anecdotes where that's applied.
Oh, that's kind of that brings me in a whole other direction. I won't go there just yet, but that is kind of an exciting kind of a branching component of it, where we don't work, as you mentioned before, in an environment where we make widgets and another department makes the same widgets and we're competing for sales. It's no, we work to serve a community, and that community gets a vote in how we perform, sometimes adversarial, sometimes supportively. But let's talk about, so clearly you're going to cover the levels of LTEM and that evaluation, or the transfer evaluation. Of that, is there, as people begin to do research, because I'm sure some people are going to research this before they show up to your class, is there an area to zero in on, something they should really kind of try to digest before they come see your class?
Yeah, so there's a website called worklearning.com. And you can just Google LTEM, Lima Tango Echo Mike, and it'll bring up Will Tallheimer's webpage. there's a 32-page document that he wrote that supports his research, his methodologies for creating LTEM, and then looking at what LTEM actually does. If they do the pre-work, it's going to make it a lot easier for them to understand how we're going to apply this in the class. I think that when they see it, anytime I've shown this to law enforcement, they've just been like, holy crap, where has this been all my life, kind of a thing. Well, law enforcement instructors. So the things that we complain about, attendance and completion, learner activity, learner perceptions, the smile sheets, they don't measure training, they don't measure evaluation or performance at all. There's nothing there. We don't measure transfer at all. And that's addressed within LTEM. It actually has separations of where transfer occurs and where it doesn't occur. But one of the things that I really like about LTEM is that, for instance, the highest level of Kirkpatrick's is impact on society kind of a thing. Yeah. And that's like, how much has our tool changed the environment, or how much of our profits are impacting the town, that kind of thing. It's all profit or return on investment oriented. For the top tier of LTEM, it's effects of transfer. And effects of transfer can be measured as opposed to the results. We can't measure if our pursuit policy has saved lives by not chasing, and we can't measure whether pursuing people is effective because we don't know how many lives were impacted by our catching a person. But we can measure how effective the pursuits are and how effective the arrest of that subject was on the impact of crime overall in our city. Now, that's not something that Kirkpatrick's is really set up to establish, but we can measure the individual performance of participants in a pursuit, as well as measure the impact of pursuing those people. Now, and that's one of the things I address in a lot of my in my classes and in my book and all that stuff. We're measuring the wrong things, and measuring the wrong things leads entirely to the learning transfer evaluation model.
I love it. And so there are the 8 steps, and as you mentioned, I've noticed that they are kind of broken down into what's adequate, what's not, as far as effectiveness of transfer. Is there any that are they all equally important? Is there any that we should zero in on more intentionally? It appears as though the first 4 are, like you said, just kind of the smile sheets and that kind of stuff, the stuff we've been doing all along. Right. But when it comes to our ability to actually evaluate that transfer, are there any that we should be more focused on than any others, or are they all important?
I'd say, well, they're all important. And the reason they're important is because by using the design tool, you can see if you're actually measuring anything of value. It's a hierarchy of complexity, kind of like how Bloom's taxonomy is, but it's not a hierarchy of importance.
That's what
it completely depends on your goal. What is your goal? Is your goal to measure the effects of training based on, are you training people for like community policing? If you're training people on community policing, you will want to see the effects of transfer. If you're measuring performance of a couple of BJJ holds, it's going to be harder to measure the effects of transfer on tier 8. But if you're creative and you understand the impact, there are things you can measure that would be a result of that. Doing BJJ might not necessarily affect the work, but it would affect, injuries and use of force. It could affect the ability to stay calm and better de-escalate because you have tools that you trust that you can use. There are ways of doing that. It's entirely based on what your goals of the course are and what your goals and intention are for what you want your participants to be able to perform at the end of it. So I'd say if there's anything you want to target, stay out of the gray. You want to avoid 1, 2, and lower 3 or 3B as much as possible. You want to be in the teal and the green as much as possible.
And so that 3B, that's at like the 3 levels, that's learner perception kind of area. And then 4 would be like knowledge check, basically what would be a level 2 in Kirkpatrick model. There are steps even before you step between 1 and 2 when you deal with LTEM, right?
Right. Matter of fact, it's one of the things that Will has a boot camp on this, and he does a much better job at training this than I can because it's his baby. But for the most part, level 2 in Kirkpatrick's is pretty much tier 3 through tier 6. So it really breaks it down. And
I was going to ask about that, Rick. So when I asked my question earlier about is there anywhere we should zero in on, what stood out to me when I was doing some research on this ahead of time was level 5 seems to be, that's decision making, right? Am I interpreting this correctly? That seems to be, and you gave that BJJ example, so it's a great place to start. One of the things is we kind of lay this out in terms of measuring the effectiveness the effectiveness with that for how we present something is how the learner, the participant, decides to apply what they've learned effectively, both in scenario and real world after the fact. And so when we evaluate transfer and we go back and we AAR it, or we kind of look at it in reverse and we get that decision-making moment, you chose to do this in this situation. What led to that? That's where I zeroed in on it. I had a feeling you were going to say they're all important. Don't zero in on one, but it felt to me like decision-making might be one of those spaces where I would get drawn into as a trainer quite often. And I was really glad you kind of clarified, don't get zeroed in, focus on all 8. They all matter.
Yeah, it was actually when I saw tier 5 that the alarm bells and the million candle watt spotlight popped on over my head of like, this is exactly what law enforcement training needs to measure. We have case law that says we have to have decision-making in our training. How many things are we calling training that has no decision-making? We just sit there, listen, and leave, and we get training points.
Yeah.
How many courses do we take where we're told what to do and then we're measured? Like de-escalation training is one of my favorite horses to beat.
This is perfect for that, though.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much crappy de-escalation training out there, and I've evaluated a lot for IADLIS NCP. There's a lot of de-escalation training that's so focused on the results, but we don't control the result because we can de-escalate something as much as possible till we're blue in the face, and that dude still decides to fight, still pulls a knife, still pulls a gun. But de-escalation training is, if you do it this way, people will de-escalate. And we're seeing that, and I truly believe, I don't have statistics on it, but I'd love to do the research if someone wants to hire me to do that, of how many people are injured because they're de-escalating too much and they're waiting for the result that never came that they got in training. And
well, because they're looking for that competency-focused, outcome-focused result where in this case, I'm going to talk this person into this, or I'm going to close distance with and do and that largely, and that's why I guess, the next level would be really important in the transfer space too. The competence piece is I chose to do this. I wasn't as competent as I thought I was. And therefore, I had to redo the decision cycle and go with another option, or the other guy got a vote and I now had to make a different decision. And that's where, as we do those task transfers rapidly in this field, it's super important to be able to evaluate how we do that.
Exactly. And when we have case law, it says that we have to have decision-making. All of our case law is also based on results. Somebody didn't like the result of something that happened, and we hold people accountable for it. But if we're not training them according to case law, which includes decision-making, which includes realistic environments, includes realistic examples, then we don't have anything to measure. And that's why Kirkpatrick's has been stumbling in the law enforcement industry. When I discovered LTEM, decision-making number 5 is absolutely what's missing in a lot of the training that I've evaluated, a lot of the training that I've attended. And it's scary. It's scary because one of the biggest complaints we hear from veteran law enforcement are people aren't making decisions. They're waiting to be told what to do. Well, if we're not measuring it already, if we're not designing courses to measure decision-making, we're not going to measure decision-making at the end of class, and we're not going to measure decision-making out in the field. And we have people freezing, not making good decisions, not knowing what their options are. So by including LTEM as part of your design model, and you have decision making, that's just a focus in my perspective and the way I use Bloom's. And by the way, Dr. Thalheimer does not like Bloom's taxonomy. So while I consider him a very good friend, this is the place where we diverge in our belief systems. But by ordering our tasks according to what the performance is that we want them to see, do we want them to have knowledge? Absolutely. But you have 4B, which is rote knowledge. Like I know that the Illinois was the first state to establish a juvenile justice system in 1899. What does that do for me in performing any kind of juvenile justice calls? Absolutely nothing. Level 4A is the reason we have a juvenile justice system is because they don't have the decision-making capabilities that others have. So we need to deal with that in a different way. So being able to separate out where the information needs to go and how we're going to measure the performance also indicates how important it is to evaluate that performance out in the field, out in reality. And by the way, we're not utilizing another tool for doing the after course evaluation. And it blows my mind. And this would be a very effective tool for field trainers, FTO. They get to see the impact of all that training that those people have had in recruit training. If we don't give them a tool to evaluate the performance, and LTEM can do that, how do we know how to adjust training in basic if we're not using the field training officers as a reference point for here are the problems I'm seeing, here are the performance they're not doing. I've measured them according to LTEM on what they're accomplishing, and they're not hitting these points. Feed that back to the academies. I don't know why academies don't have conferences every year of all their FTOs and say, okay, tell us what's missing. Tell us what to fix. What are we doing well? LTEM provides that path for starting to create an actual learning environment, a learning ecosystem where we could greatly change the quality of training and the quality of policing. We all agree that there needs to be change and reform in law enforcement. It doesn't start with training, it starts with training design. But we can't design training well unless we know what we're going to evaluate as performance after the training is done.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited, and I'm looking forward to. I can see your class now, the audience sitting in there, and I can see some of the FTO champions that we have in the ILEETA membership that will be at the conference attending this class, and it'll be a heck of a conversation. I'm looking forward to that. And it's funny you mentioned. I honestly thought, because I don't know which came first. I should have done a little more research on this. I apologize. Bloom's or Wilhelm, which model? But what I will say, I'm going to guess Bloom's. But what I will say is that they look as though they overlay by design. I mean, am I wrong?
Will would say you're wrong. But so Bloom's was developed in the early 1950s. As an answer to all of the World War II vets who are coming home and getting the GI Bill and going to college. So Dr. Benjamin Bloom wrote the first handbook, which was cognitive domain. They wrote the affective domain after that, which applies more to education, and just decided to leave the psychomotor to somebody else. I prefer a 7-level psychomotor domain, Bloom's domain. The reason I like Bloom so much is because it has those years of testing application stuff. There's a lot of criticism of Bloom's. Eventually, I'm going to write an article about why Bloom's is okay. It's actually in the book. I wrote that, but I'm going to write a better article to address a lot of the complaints about Bloom's. But Dr. Thalheimer published LTEM in 2019. So even though Bloom's was written in the 1950s, it was revised in 2001 by Dr. I just totally spaced his name. Sorry about that. It was Anderson. Dr. Anderson revised in 2001. I see it as overlaying, and that's why I have that tool that I'm going to give away in the class. It's a spreadsheet where if instructors are actually doing the analysis instead of going straight to content, I have a concept. I'm now creating the outline. I'm now creating the content for it. If you do the analysis and find out what are the tasks I actually need to have measured in this course, you take that task list and you order it according to what level of performance you want them to do with that task. Is the task a cognitive something they need to know, background information and knowledge? Or is it something that they need to decide on doing? Or is it something that they need to decide on doing and they need to perform as an activity? So like with firearms, knowing how your firearm works is great. We have to have that foundational knowledge. Decision-making is knowing when to use the firearm. The task performance is using a shoot, no shoot situation where you're applying all that together. What is the thing that you want to measure the most? You can measure all three, but by just like in Bloom's taxonomy, it's a level of complexity. The task performance is going to require decision-making. Decision-making is going to require fundamental knowledge. So you have that overlay, that sense of complexity. And the ultimate goal is, what is it that I want to measure them doing? Because if it's being able to perform a better, let's say a qualification that requires, or not even a qualification, because that's not it. Let's say it's a practical shooting class, and practical shooting class, you have no shoot targets and shoot targets. That ultimately is going to require all the decision making and the foundational knowledge, not only how to use the firearm, but when to use the firearm. And that would be the terminal performance objective would focus on the task performance of performing, doing the scenario-based training or doing a practical shooting course of fire. The enabling performance objectives would be the decision-making and the foundational knowledge.
That makes sense. Absolutely. I'll tell you, I have a feeling. So I did lose track of time here. We are over the 30-minute goal, but I will tell you, Rick, I have a feeling we could have chatted about this for hours. I think the ILEETA conference is definitely going to be a significant point for a lot of people to become familiar with this. So in a nutshell, when you designed this course, who did you have in mind? Who should be in that room, and what are they going to walk away with?
I would say experienced instructors or new instructors, anyone who's currently creating training. If you're creating training, you should be in the course. If your job is not to create training, you should be in the course to see what you can bring back to the academy. Academy instructors, academy directors probably should be in there because ultimately they need to measure it. I think pretty much the wide gamut of instructors would benefit most. But the people who are actually writing courseware will benefit the most because they'll have that foundational knowledge of ADDIE and writing performance objectives. But if you're passionate about wanting to change the trajectory of law enforcement training, I think the course is appropriate because it gives a very specific tool to a very general topic, to a very general application, because it applies in all training and education. It applies in both education and training.
I love it. And then what am I going to walk away with when I leave your class?
You know what? So I'm intending on people that, like I said, they'll have a workbook, but in class, I want them to come with a course that they want to design or a course that they need to redesign so that they can apply some of this information and some of this knowledge in class. There's going to be opportunities to do work and ask questions about applying it. And because that's the thing about applying the LTEM, when it comes to the overall environment of creating training, it applies at the beginning, it applies at the end, but how to actually do the measurements post-course is, I think, where a lot of questions are going to be, and we'll address some of that. How are you going to implement this at an agency in your training department, at an academy as part of your overall training evaluation for the academy performance? But individual instructors can start figuring out how to encourage field training officers and other personnel to want to contribute to training and make it a partnership with everybody instead of just you're a trainer, do the instructor, now go do your other job.
Perfect. All right. So just to close us out here, the book you've written, you've got a book you published on this topic. You'll have that at ILEETA. Are you going to be able to join us on Wednesday night for the authors event? Are you interested in having a table there?
Yeah, I was planning on finding out when you were going to open it up for that February 1st is the date that we get to sign up for it. I absolutely intended on jumping on that. I'm not sure how many books I should bring, but at the very least, if I don't have any on hand, I can take orders for them or whatever.
I would say bring a good handful. That's for sure. I have a feeling they're going to be pretty popular. And then obviously in the show notes, we'll have how to get in touch with you, how to follow you on various social media platforms. But for those listening on a podcast platform, where can we get in touch with Rick Jacobs and find out more about LTEM A?
So probably I go into my socials quite often. It's a part-time job, as anybody running a business and an association knows. The best way is probably Instagram. I answer everybody's Instagram. If it's the only, my LTEM account on Instagram is the only one that I get notifications for. So they can reach out to me directly. It's LET_N_EC. And reach out to me, ask questions, or they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn page, which I think is part of the social media broadcast. I respond to everything. I respond to all comments, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. I respond to all email. So those would probably be the fastest ways of getting a hold of me, or going to my website, letnec.com, and putting in a request, or schedule time with me on Calendly. So you can schedule time to have a conversation if you want.
Awesome. Rick, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you at the conference. And to everybody out there, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you are in the training space, thank you so much for what you're doing for the profession. Continue to keep up the good work, and we hope to see you at the ILEETA Conference, March 16th through the 21st. Rick, stick around for just a minute. We'll have a brief conversation after the call.
Sure thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.